So here we are, Augustus. All right, welcome back. So what we're going to talk about now is the official start of the Roman Empire, your first Roman emperor, and it is, of course, this man named Augustus, who in our previous lecture we had called Octavian. And so in 27 BC, we get a new name, a new title, and a new period in Roman history. An empire is born, as I say, and liberty begins to decline, which is going to be part of what we're going to discuss as we look at the story of the Roman Empire. And so notice the dates too, not too significant to memorize exact dates, but notice we're going from BC to AD. And so that's something important. The dates are going to start going up in as we continue our lectures. And also it means something else is going on during this time period, this thing called the beginning of Christianity. So that's something that I'm not going to talk about in this lecture, but we're obviously going to cover in future lectures. In this lecture, I'm kind of just focusing on the first Roman emperor, Augustus, what he does, why is he important, how he gets these names, and everything that's going to be associated with him that I want you to know for, the quiz and the exams and so forth. So here we go. So Augustus, 27 BC, what does the word Augustus mean? His name basically means revered one, right? So these, again, as always, the key words you want to get down. And so the revered one, right? And he doesn't just take the name Augustus, he also takes this title Princeps Civitatis. And that name termed Princeps Civitatis, that basically translates to first citizen. So I am the first of all the citizens, and I am Augustus, the revered one. And of course, Imperator, emperor. And so this is why we say in 27 BC, the Roman Empire begins. So then the question is, what is Augustus going to do as emperor, and what kind of ruler was he? So for all of you who are taking my course, the History 110 class, what I want you to do is in your modules, you have a document called the Res Justia, and it's kind of really helpful if you do this the way I'm going to tell you. You're going to take this document and you're going to actually pause this lecture for anybody who's in my class. And you pause this lecture and I want you to read the document. And as you read the document, Res Justia, I want you to think about, is Augustus a good ruler of Rome? Yes or no? And kind of have that question in your mind. Read the document. It's in your module. And then after you read the document, just come right back and press play and keep going. For everyone else who's just kind of watching this, I'll just kind of tell you right now what this document is about, right? And so this is a document that was commissioned by Augustus. And when you read this document, it really paints Augustus as this wonderful leader of Rome. It talks about all his achievements. He added Egypt to the Roman Empire. He gave his money, he provided for this group and provided for that group. And there's a lot of detail in there of how wonderful he is. But what he also is in there is an interesting point where he says the power of dictator that was offered me by the Senate and so forth, I refused to accept. I didn't really want to be a ruler. I didn't really want to be this dictator and all of that. I never wanted to be these titles. And when you read that, you clearly see that this document a lot of it is propaganda. That Augustus was trying to make himself look kind of humble and, I really don't want to be this emperor guy. But, anybody who's really studied Augustus knows, these guys were very power-hungry individuals. And all you have to do is see what he did when he was in power to know that, he is going to rule as emperors do in a more authoritarian way than you're ever going to see in a republic. And so the big question, kind of the million-dollar question to think about as you learn about Augustus and you study the birth of the Roman Empire is why? Why did the Romans accept this? Why were the Romans okay by giving up a republic where you have this checks and balance that we talked about before, Polybius, and discussing all that in our previous lectures, and be willing to accept an emperor? Right? And then a series of emperors for that matter. And there's a couple things that are going to play a role in this. One is what Augustus is going to do. He's going to put, quote unquote, new men into power. And when I say new men, people loyal to him, people loyal to his family and so forth that are going to be in a lot of political positions. He reforms the way the Senate works and kind of changes. So you're still going to have a Roman Senate during the empire, but the Roman Senate is just not going to be what it used to be. It's going to be more of a kind of this administrative function than anyone that actually has power the way they had before. But I think one of the most important points is this term called Pax Romana. What is this term Pax Romana? Pax Romana simply means Roman peace. Guys, you have to think of what was going on in Rome for basically the previous 100 years before Augustus. It's been chaos, right? They had, Sulla, and they had civil wars, and they had slave uprisings, and all these problems that really challenged the Roman world. And of course, civil wars and conflicts, as I just said. And after 100 years of this, Augustus comes in and says, well, I'm going to bring a Roman peace. And he does, right? This is going to be like a 200-year period starting from the time of Augustus where you're going to have a quote-unquote Roman peace. Now, I don't want you to think there's no fighting and no conflict and no nothing at all. There's still going to be conflicts. There's still going to be blood and so forth, but it's not going to be as chaotic as it was before. And what's so fascinating about this and so important is how this is not unique in history, how so many times in history people are willing to accept a more authoritarian ruler in exchange for stability and peace. One of the terms, I didn't put it up here, but definitely worth getting down, bread and circus, right? This is an idea that the Romans, flourished from. Bread and circus, the Roman emperors. What did that term mean, bread and circus? You give people bread, food, you give them circus, entertainment, and at that point you can pretty much do what you want in terms of controlling people in a society. And I always make this point, my students, and I'll make this point here for everybody watching, is that when you have an authoritarian or a government so big that they take care of every one of your needs, they feed you, they clothe you, they house you, they educate you, and you are fully under their, kind of way of maintaining everything for your life, you're really not free at that point, right? You're not living in a free nation. You may be taken care of, but you're not free. And this is, again, not unique to the Roman Empire. You could see this in countless civilizations, and there is no civilization, including ours, that is immune to it, right? And this is something I cover in my other lectures in my modern Western Civ when I talk about totalitarianism and, the rise of the Hitlers and the Stalins and all these kind of ideas that I kind of go into more detail in other lectures. But you could see this concept, is part of human nature, right? That too many times people would rather just live on their knees than, as the old saying goes, than die standing up, right? That so many people just prefer just to, I'm just going to go along and live, even though they're not free. So we see this, and we see this with Augustus, whether it's, reforming the Senate so it doesn't have as much power, whether putting new people in, censorship. One of the things about Augustus is he does impose censorship. There's a famous story of a playwright named Ovid, who his works were not allowed during this time period. Another thing Augustus said I want you to know does is establish what is called the Praetorian Guards. And the Praetorian Guards are the elite guards that guarded the emperor. And this is kind of interesting if you study a lot more Roman history. Again, this is just a survey course, so I don't go into tremendous detail. But during the Roman Empire, these Praetorian Guards are going to play a pretty significant role. And there's one group you do not want to take off if you're a Roman emperor, and it's them. And then he's also going to establish the dynasty, right? I shouldn't say he establishes the dynasty, but it's going to be the dynasty that continues with him, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, as you could see here. And the way he establishes this is he basically has his daughter Julia marry this guy named Tiberius because he wanted Tiberius, who he had ended up adopting as well because Augustus didn't have a son, so he had a daughter named Julia. And he says, Julia, you're going to marry Tiberius because I want Tiberius to be the next emperor. And so with that, you get this first empire, and as we're going to continue to see as we talk about more Roman emperors, these Roman emperors, in some cases, are going to be incredibly authoritarian. And so what is next? Well, what's next is to look at the rest of this Julio-Claudian dynasty. And we're going to talk very briefly about Tiberius. And then, actually for Tiberius, I think all I'll do is tell you he just ruled from 14 to 37 AD. Interesting Tiberius, little note on him. There's accounts that he didn't even really want to be emperor that much. He kind of spent a lot of time even outside of Rome, just living on a little island. But then there was Caligula and Claudius and their couple crazy stories and Nero. and I'm going to cover those guys in our next lecture, especially Caligula and Claudius. So we're going to kind of pause there, and then we're going to kind of get into the crazy emperors, especially Caligula. Claudius wasn't so crazy, but he had some interesting stories. So I look forward to those in the next lecture. And that's it. So we're just going to keep going with these early Roman emperors I want you to know. All right? If you have any questions, let me know.